abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. We're going to open up the phones and give you a chance to comment. I can't imagine this hour some of you are just going to sit back and say, well, I'll just hear what you have to say, but I don't have any comments, because in light of what's transpired over the last 24, 48 hours, pretty significant, and it could make the difference, I think, even in the re-election campaign of Donald Trump. Now, again, I'll be the first to admit that anything said in July, a year and a half almost before the presidential election, might not have a difference, but I also recognize that sometimes you give your opponents enough ammunition, they will continue to use it throughout the next few months, and we will see how that plays out. Sometimes just one comment made by a candidate or a sitting president begins to define who they are, and if you're not familiar, we have an interesting set of circumstances. I love exactly the way one put it in the red state. As Democrats fight a civil war, Trump strips naked and runs onto the battlefield. Now, this does need a little bit of context, but not much. If you go to our website today, you'll see that two of the articles I've posted were those that came from this weekend and really was the topic that I thought we would be addressing. I'm not going to ignore it, by the way, but one is by Derek Hunter, The Arrogance and the Ignorance, and it deals with some of the statements that have been made by the so-called Gang of Four, or the Squad, depending what you want to call them, but that's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Ayanna Pressley, Rashida Tlaib, and Ilhan Omar. And then another one is called Pelosi's House of Pain. And you've got to understand, even as this particular article reminds us, that there has been this unbelievable, over the last week or so, civil war that has developed in the House of Representatives between the so-called progressive Democrats and the Speaker of the House, where they start calling each other racist. And it isn't just now Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez suggesting that Nancy Pelosi has a problem with women of color. It was some on the other side accusing them of racist comments, and it just got worse and worse and worse, to the point where even last week we talked about Nancy Pelosi speaking at a Democrat caucus meeting saying, we just got to stop airing our grievances in public, and we need to start moving ahead with our agenda if we're going to have any chance of being reelected. And there is, interestingly enough, another article that I will be bringing later. Democrat operatives say that Ocasio-Cortez media coverage could derail the party in 2020. At the same time, the anger has gotten so bad that some of the so-called squad or gang of four have said that some of these Democrats, they might primary them because they're not doing enough. In other words, by meaning we're going to run one of our progressive Democratic candidates against you in a safe Democratic district, and you're going to have the fight of your life just to defend yourself against the charges that they're going to make. Then they've returned fire and saying, you know what, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, you better enjoy your 2 years of fame, because you will be primaried and you will not actually serve in Congress any longer. And so in the midst of this remarkable civil war, it brings me back to some basic principles. Now, you don't have to be politically involved to understand these, because you learn some of these from your family. You learn some of them on the playground. You learn some of them certainly in high school. And one of those principles is, when your opponents are fighting each other, stay out of the fray. Unfortunately, that is not something that the president can do. And I'll just read this piece from the Associated Press to make the case. Injecting race into his criticism of Democrats, President Donald Trump said 4 congresswomen of color should go back to the broken and crime-infested countries they came from. Of course, ignoring the fact that all the women are American citizens and 3 of them were born in the United States. Okay, I will admit that Ilhan Omar is born in Somalia, but there's, a problem with that kind of broad brush. Okay, his attack drew a searing condemnation from Democrats who labeled the remarks racist and remarkably divisive. As you might imagine, people like Representative Hakeem Jeffries called Trump a racist arsonist. Democratic candidate Bernie Sanders said, when I call the president a racist, this is what I'm talking about. And as one individual pointed out, is it possible that Donald Trump has been able to unite the Democrats? Because stepping back from the immediate emotion of the moment, Donald Trump has now forced Nancy Pelosi in defending the very congresswoman who just last week called her a racist. Has Trump now successfully ended the civil war within the Democrat Party? I don't think so, but nevertheless, it just reminds you of this kind of situation that has developed over a lengthy period of time, and the situation that has, in a sense, resulted in the back and forth in the House of Representatives. As the old guy around the table, let me just mention that sometimes when you have either as Republicans in the House and a Democrat president, or Democrats in the House and a Republican president, after a while, some of the natives get very restless. They are convinced that they are going to be successful, and they feel stymied at every turn. And so pretty soon, no longer are they firing their guns, if you want to use the military metaphor, at the opponent. They start firing in and out of the trenches at each other. And so this is not the first time that this has happened, but it's the first time you've had somebody who has really traditionally been a backbencher, somebody that's a first-term member of Congress who usually does not have a prestigious appointment in committee, usually does not have a voice to really express his or her opposition. But that has changed because the social media opportunities that have been accorded to especially AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, make her a force to contend with, and as a result, give her, first of all, a platform to speak out against the Speaker of the House, and number two, because she has enough of a following, the Speaker of the House, who oftentimes will very quickly put those people in their place. You can think of Tip O'Neill during the 1980s, Newt Gingrich during the 1990s, John Boehner in the first decade of the 21st century. Not happening quite so much. And so as a result, this civil war has gotten pretty ugly. But in the midst of it, for reasons known only to this president, he felt that it was important to inject himself into this. And so when we get back, of course, we have a couple of other things that we need to address as well. But I'd love to get your thoughts, because even so, at the moment, the attack is now against the president once again because of his tweets. I don't think that's going to last forever, because there are restless members in the House of Representatives that are absolutely convinced that the leadership there is not serving them well. And the leadership is frustrated beyond, I think, any measure about some of the kinds of things that are being said by the squad or the gang of four. So we have a lot to talk about today, but most importantly, most of the time, I know you probably sit back and kind of watch some of this play out, but you have to have probably some thoughts about what has transpired over the last 24 or 48 hours. So I'd love to get your comments. 1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212. We'll come back and get into a little more of the details related to what's happening in the White House and in Congress right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Many of the best-selling books of the last decade have been written by the New Atheist. Although you may never meet any of these authors, you will certainly interact with skeptics who use their arguments. One of the best Christian books to help refute many of the arguments by these New Atheists is the book Is God Just a Human Invention?, written by Sean McDowell and Jonathan Morrow. They answer 18 of the most cited arguments used by the New Atheists against religion and especially against Christianity. One of those arguments is found in the title of the book, that God is merely a human invention. Sigmund Freud wrote that religious beliefs are illusions, fulfillments of the oldest, strongest, and most urgent wishes of mankind. In other words, we project the existence of God based upon a human need. It is wish fulfillment. We wish there would be a God, so we assume that he exists. As McDowell and Murrow point out in their book, there are many good reasons to reject this idea. One objection is that Freud's argument begs the question. In other words, he assumes there is no God and then merely tries to find an explanation for why someone would believe in God anyway. The projection theory can cut both ways. If you argue that humans created God out of a need for security, then you could just as easily argue that atheists believe there is no God because they want to be free and unencumbered by a creator who might make moral demands on them. It's not surprising to read how many prominent atheists in the past have acknowledged just that. They wanted their sexual freedom and found that required that they reject the idea of God. Paul teaches in the book of Romans that fallen individuals suppress the truth in unrighteousness. The Bible also has a good explanation for why most people believe in God. The writer of Ecclesiastes observes that God has set eternity in the hearts of men. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism. Viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
You know, you don't have to be a political activist or somebody involved in politics. Just recognize some kind of true statements. And one of those I mentioned just a minute ago is when your opponents are fighting each other, stay out of the fray. Well, the president decided not to do that. And another one of those axioms that I think we all learned when we were maybe even in grade school, but certainly by the time we got to middle school or high school is when your opponents are firing at you, don't give them more ammunition. And it is unfortunate that this president is convinced that every time something happens, he has to comment on it. And in this case, I think he has given them a great deal of ammunition. Now, to be fair, I don't necessarily agree with what I'm going to say here, but I wanted to give at least the other side, and that is the chief of staff for Vice President Mike Pence. His name is Mark Short. Matter of fact, I just got a book the other day about the faith of Mike Pence. That might be an interesting book to talk about. But nevertheless, the chief of staff to the vice president, trying to sort of tamp down things, told reporters that Donald Trump, President Trump, was responding to very specific comments made by Representative Ilhan Omar, who, by the way, was born in Somalia and is a representative from Minnesota, and he was not making a universal statement. Okay, well, that's why you have to be careful with your tweet, because the tweet said Congresswomen with an E, not Congresswoman. And so that seemed to me an almost certain reference to a group of women, as I said, known as the Squad or a group of four. And so, you know, if that was not enough, of course, the president doubled down. I said, when will these radical left congresswomen apologize to our country, the people of Israel, and even the office of the president for the foul language they've used, the terrible things they've said? So many people are angry at them and their horrible and disgusting actions. Those are the comments by the president, and I know these will come back to haunt him. Some people, again, are oftentimes tempted to say, well, what happens in July, a year and a half before the final general election, won't matter. But, you know, these comments, these clips, these tweets, they have a life of their own. And before I get into some of the Civil War, which was really the conversation we were supposed to have today until the president posted his tweets, Andrew, who, of course, engineers this program, pointed me to David French. Now, David French has been in the studio with us before. We quote from him quite often, as a matter of fact. And I thought this thread was very good because he says, I know that Trump's tweet was mostly telling natural-born American citizens to go back to the places from which they came, a racist directive to his targets, but should immigrants have a special kind of gratitude? And in the midst of all this negativity, he reminds us of something we've talked about before. Because David French says, for example, in one of his tweets, I believe every American should be grateful for American liberty and opportunity. But the average immigrant citizen did more to earn their place than the average natural-born citizen. For example, he points out, number one, they exercise courage and grit to get here. Number two, they learn a new language. Number three, they stay out of trouble and build a new life. Number four, they become productive members of the community. Number five, they take a test most Americans would fail. By the way, if you've seen any of my commentaries, they found a disproportionately high percentage of people born here could not pass the citizenship test of the United States. And number six, they swear an oath of allegiance. So a lot of good arguments that he makes there. Here's what I had to do to enjoy the blessings of American liberty. Number one, survive labor and delivery. Good job, David French. I'm sure there is a column coming out here, so the moment it surfaces, we will post it. But we can sit here all day and talk about Donald Trump and the, first of all, the inappropriate comments, the political miscalculation, and you can talk about all the things he has done. But eventually this will subside one way or the other because the conflict between the so-called Gang of Four, or the Squad, and the Speaker will continue. And it has turned the 106th Congress into what used to be called the People's House. It's starting to sound a little bit more like Thunderdome. And that was an argument made by Matthew Continetti in the first article we've posted here today, in which he points out that it's become a new era. He says House Democrats have returned to power after 8 years, and these Democrats were remarkably diverse in age, ethnicity, race, gender, as well as in ideology, because Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, as well as Rashida Tlaib, are actually members of the Democrat Socialists of America. When we refer to AOC or Rashida Tlaib as socialists, that's how they refer to themselves. They have a membership in the Democratic Socialist of America. Technically, that means they're not necessarily members of the Democratic Party, but they had to run within it, so they're obviously adopted into that because they ran on the Democratic Party ticket. But they do call themselves socialists. So then they go back to Nancy Pelosi back in January, who said, our nation is at a historic moment. 2 months ago, the American people spoke and demanded a new dawn. Well, Matthew says, well, the sun has set and fast. Whatever Pelosi's plans might have been, they've been lost in a fog of anti-Semitism and left-wing radicalism. If Ilhan Omar isn't causing Pelosi trouble, then Ocasio-Cortez is, and vice versa. One day, the speaker has to respond to the charge that Jewish money controls American foreign policy. The next, she has to downplay cows. I won't get into the words there. It's enough to make one pity her almost. And he says Nancy Pelosi's bind began on election night, as Republicans learned from 2011 to 2015, holding one chamber of Congress isn't worth that much. The president and the upper chamber can block legislation. Frustrated by inaction, the majority turned inward. Divisions grow. The more extreme membership target leadership. The speaker spends more time negotiating with, in this case, her own party, but back then his own party, than with the president and the Senate Majority Leader. Recently, as if that was not enough, again, Matthew Continetti points out that it seemed as though the major divide would be over impeachment, because Nancy Pelosi is terrified by the prospect. The idea isn't popular, especially with voters in these battleground states. And the Robert Mueller report didn't give her much to work with. She would be in a much better position had the special counsel actually said that the president obstructed justice. But he copped out, leaving people confused and Pelosi forlorn. So she's let Nadler and Schiff and Cummings fire their subpoena cabinets at will, but this war of attrition favors the president and deepens the frustration of Democrats who wish Trump had been impeached on Inauguration Day. But then he goes on to say that the crisis of the border revealed another division. Shouldn't have been much of a surprise. Immigration is the defining issue of our time, Matthew Continetti says. Its tendrils entangling themselves in the politics of democracies around the world. Democrats and many Republicans object to the conditions facing detained asylum seekers. What separates the Democrats is what to do about it. The majority, including representatives from Trump's districts, take the classic approach, throw money at the problem. The squad, or the gang of four, whichever you want to call them, has a different idea. They voted against border funds to make a point and strike a pose. Ocasio-Cortez's outlandish rhetoric isn't helping. She described the detention centers as concentration camps. Already in favor of abolishing Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, this week she says she's open to shutting down the entire Department of Homeland Security. Why stop there? I'm guessing she doesn't like the Department of Defense either. Karl Rove, who in 2002 won a midterm election over again, he's talking about winning not directly but indirectly, said that Ocasio-Cortez's comments were moronic, stupid, naive, and dumb. That's an understatement. And, of course, the whole issue is that now you have the comments that she's made about Nancy Pelosi, because when Nancy Pelosi stated the obvious to Maureen Dowd about the fact that these are individuals that only are 4 votes out of 435 individuals in the House of Representatives, that caused Ocasio-Cortez to suggest that, well, she just doesn't have a place in her life and in her mindset for these women of color, and, of course, seemingly insinuated that she was racist. Well, again, I love what Matthew Continetti said. If Pelosi's racist, then America's in serious trouble. The absurdity of the claim was best expressed by Congressman Lacey Clay, who is black, saying, "You're getting pushback so you can resort to using the race card?" He asked. Unbelievable. But the very absurdity highlights the position in which the Democratic leadership finds itself today. This is, of course, the conversation we were going to have, and it's going to surface again. I suspect eventually the Trump tweets may blow over if he decides not to put out another one in the next 10 minutes. But it brings us back to some of the very significant divisions that are taking place in the Democrat Party, and one of the reasons why nothing really is getting done. If you listen to this particular hour on Wednesdays, usually when we talk with Representative Van Taylor, you can acknowledge and understand that literally nothing is happening in the House of Representatives except a lot of testimony, a lot of hearings, a lot of subpoenas, but no significant legislation. We'll come back and talk about this more right after this.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate 2 replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212, talking about some of the conflict in the Democrat Party in Congress, as well as the reaction to President Donald Trump's tweets. And I want to get back to that in just a minute, but let me at least acknowledge some of the other things we might have been talking about today, and that is the decision by the head of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, known as ICE, to begin to deport families that actually have orders to leave the country but have either escaped their notice, or individuals that have, in one case, tried to flee from ICE agents. These immigrants who've been given orders to leave the country are government targets in at least 10 cities, and many of those cities tend to be the so-called sanctuary cities. Now, New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio, who, of course, also is a presidential candidate, said that he had reports about this nationwide crackdown on immigrants. And in the article that we've posted here, said that it was already underway, but a more recent article said he had not seen much example of that. There were some attempts by ICE agents to round up some of the residents in Brooklyn and Harlem, and so far those hadn't been that successful. There are advocates on the side of, if you will, kind of open borders that have actually been coaching some of these individuals about their rights, including instructions not to respond if agents knock on the door unless shown a warrant signed by a judge. And so part of this is the agency's acting director said these targets are on what's called an accelerated docket of immigration court cases. And these are primarily individuals from Central America who arrived a number of years ago in many cases. And for those that say this is unprecedented, that's not true, because these operations occurred in 2016 under President Barack Obama. They occurred in 2017 under President Donald Trump. And in some respects, as a matter of fact, the head of the acting head, I should say, of ICE at the moment, said this family operation is nothing new. It's part of a day-to-day operations. We're trying to surge some additional resources to deal with the glut of cases that came out of the accelerated docket. But after this operation is over, these cases are still going to be viable cases that will be out there investigating and pursuing. And Donald Trump said that these authorities are really focusing primarily on criminals. So again, that's something to think about in many of these cases, not all. A good number of those actually have been arrested because they have some kind of arrest record. Those that were targeted for deportation are actually selected out because they have an arrest and maybe conviction record as well. And so that's one of those issues as well. But even as they collect these people that are being deported, you have a different set of circumstances, because we've had so many people rush the border. We've had so many people go through the system, and we now have so many people on this accelerated docket. There aren't enough places to even hold these people before they are deported. So the plan has been for them to be temporarily housed in hotels until they can be transferred to a detention center or deported. And not only do you have then, of course, things like the sanctuary cities and the mayors saying that we're going to educate them about how not to get caught. Once they are caught, then the attempt to put them in the hotel has run into resistance because, for example, Marriott Hotels said that they would not allow ICE to use its hotels for holding immigrants. And so if ICE runs out of space, it may be forced to separate family members, and the government has sort of limited space in its family detention centers, which are primarily located in Pennsylvania, of all places, and, of course, in the state of Texas. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that is one of the articles we posted here. It's something we would have been talking about, probably we'll talk about later in the week as that unfolds a little bit further. But let's get back to this ongoing kind of civil war. And again, you might say, well, what do I care? I'm not a Democrat, or what do I care? It's just Congress. And yeah, but that's why Congress isn't doing anything. And this is of real concern. But it also relates to an election, and I wanted to mention that just before we take a break, that there was a survey, a very significant survey done a while back, and it was one that began to poll various individuals who are voters in some of these key swing states. And what they're finding is that this poll has been circulated around with some of the Democratic leaders because they're talking about the negative impact that some of those individuals that are part of the squad or the group of four has had, because if nothing else, one top Democrat put it this way: if all voters hear about is AOC, it could be put the House majority in peril. In other words, if the way in which voters perceive the Democratic Party in the House of Representatives is in many ways identified by the actions by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, we might be in trouble. Matter of fact, he goes on to say she's getting all the news and defining everyone else's race. And so this is a more recent poll looking at over 1,000 voters, most of whom are white, most of whom have 2 years or less of college education. That just happens to be with the way the poll is. But here are just some of the facts from the poll. Almost 3/4, 74% of the voters in the poll recognized who Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is, with 22% holding a favorable view. So look at this. 3/4 of them know who she is, and less than a quarter of them have a favorable view of her. Now, if, again, she becomes the face of the Democrat Party, that works against you, not only in a presidential election, but even more importantly in some of these congressional elections. Let's take another one then. One of the other individuals is Ilhan Omar. She's the one that's been kind of the target of all of President Trump's criticism. She is originally from Somalia. She represents a district in the state of Minnesota. And in this particular case, about half of the people, 53% of the voters, knew who she was, and only 9% hold a favorable view of her. Again, you can do the math that if indeed these two individuals, not to mention two others, but we'll just pick on those two, one having said all sorts of racist or maybe anti-Semitic kinds of comments and anti-American comments, the other supporting everything from the Green New Deal to even suggesting that the Speaker of the House might even be a little bit racist. If that becomes the face of the Democrat Party, it is not good news for the Democratic Party. And so as a result, these surveys that are starting to float around and end up in the hands of some of these Democratic leaders are the reasons some of them are beginning to have some real questions. I've got a commentary coming out next week in which I talk about ignorance and arrogance, and Derek Hunter's piece was what was stimulating that. And I've actually put that as one of our second articles because he has a great line. He says, separately, arrogance and ignorance are some of humanity's worst traits. Together, when coupled with power, they achieve a weapons-grade stupid status. And he's talking about, of course, the Gang of Four, the squad of those. And he said, individually, this Gang of Four is strung together an uninterrupted string of gaffes, stupid statements, and racist comments that would humiliate your average teenager. But what they possess individually is nothing compared when they all come together. And the point he's making is that, again, there are some really unbelievably ignorant statements being made, but they're being said in such an arrogant, almost confident way that I think a lot of people go, I hope you really don't believe that, because if you do, I'm really very concerned about that. And so he goes on to say that Nancy Pelosi has tried to keep things calm, but he says you can't control the liberal mob even when you've created it. Years of indoctrinating people to believe that they're victims, that racism is everywhere and systemic has its consequences. And so as a result, what he is pointing out is that in many cases, the House of Representatives is anything but representative. Yes, there's 435 members, but only a handful matter to any degree, and none matter more than Speaker of the House. And Friday night, it kind of blew up as, first of all, we reported on Friday afternoon that you had kind of this back and forth between Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and the Blue Dog Democrats. But Friday night, it really blew up because then the official Twitter account of the House Democratic Caucus accused the chief of staff for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of racism against another Democrat. And you also had statements being said that some of these Democrats in the House are not woke enough. In other words, they're not liberal enough. They're not progressive enough. And then you started having all sorts of people saying, well, I will primary you. And now you have a high-ranking New York Democrat implied that primaries go both ways, which was kind of a threat that, you're threatening us, that you're going to primary us. Well, we will primary the Gang of Four, and we'll get rid of you very, very quickly. So that's kind of what has blown up since the weekend. And frankly, if we hadn't had this tweet by Donald Trump, I suspect that's what a lot of people would have been talking about, all those tweets that surfaced Friday night. But instead, most of the mainstream media will be talking about Donald Trump. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, and for a few more minutes, we'll focus on a couple of issues in the news. And then let me just give you kind of a program note. At the top of the hour, we're going to have Pat Williams with us, individual that has written this wonderful book, which is entitled Character Carved in Stone. I think it's a good antidote to everything we're talking about here. I mean, indeed, those individuals that go to West Point actually learn these 12 core virtues that build leadership, produce success. And some of them you would probably imagine are courage, initiative, perseverance, integrity. even things like compassion. So we're going to talk with him for about a half an hour with that, just as nothing else, an antidote to all the stuff that we've been talking about here today. And then we will get back into the news. But I just thought for another minute or two, I might mention again the conversation that would have been taking place today if Donald Trump had just held back and not sent his tweets out. And that is, one of the conversations would have been the rather awful reception that was accorded to the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, at the Netroots Nation. Now, she was not there, which probably is a good thing because she probably would have been booed the whole time. But if you're not familiar, Netroots Nation is kind of a progressive gathering. It brings in thousands and thousands of activists, almost to a person. I would assume that they are Democrat. A lot of them probably socialists too, but they're going to vote in the Democratic primary. And one of the individuals who spoke out, and he uses some words I can't use on the air, so I'll skip over those. So the quote's a little spicier than I will give it. But is the man who was the founder of the liberal blog Daily Kos. And he said, she doesn't act this way when blue dogs, blue dogs, which would be blue dog Democrats, say stupid, leave that out, about other Democrats and about the party and constantly criticize the party. He says, for some reason, she's singling out these four for a special brand of conflict. It doesn't make any sense. So in light of the comments by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez suggesting that the Speaker of the House has a problem with these four women of color, one of them isn't, by the way, but, you get the idea, that still is one of those interesting ideas. And so they have been critical and were critical of her about pushing off the suggestions that we should impeach President Donald Trump, that she has been too slow to embrace things like the Green New Deal, too slow to embrace ideas like Medicare for all. And so as a result, they have also been frustrated that they passed a bill to actually fund immigration reform, at least in terms of providing funding for the detention centers. So you had Ilhan Omar speaking there, saying, well, a vote for the bill was a vote to keep kids in cages and terrorize immigrant communities. Of course, this gets great applause. Of course, so does anything being said by the so-called Gang of Four. And so then you have the founder of another of one of these groups that's associated with Netroots called She the People. She was a moderator for the panel, interestingly enough, that was held there. And on the panel said, the women of color who entered Congress, they're more than 4 votes. See, again, this is something that Nancy Pelosi, Speaker Nancy Pelosi, said, they're just 4 votes. Yeah, they're only 4 votes out of 435, yes, but they have more influence. For millions of us, she said, they represent blood, sweat, and tears for us to have representation. They represent the best of American democracy. To put it mildly, Nancy Pelosi was not well received at the Netroots conference. And just another illustration that those individuals, the thousands of individuals that were there, they vote. But they do more than vote, because the primaries are more about intensity than they are about numbers. Many more people vote in the general election than vote in the primaries. That may not be the case this time with 17. Now it was, I'm going to say 17. Now it's 25 different Democrat candidates. Last time it was 17 Republicans. But it does create a lot of enthusiasm. But the bottom line is, very quickly, you're going to have a lot of these individuals who were essentially booing Nancy Pelosi and cheering people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, and Ayanna Pressley. And so they're the ones that, first of all, are going to be kind of leading the charge. They're the ones that are going to be much more likely to vote for a Bernie Sanders, a Kamala Harris, less likely to vote for, say, a Joe Biden or somebody like that, because they are going to be the most progressive kind of individuals and convinced that we have not pushed the case hard enough. And so, if nothing else, just another example, I suspect, of what is going to be a tremendous amount of overreach that is happening right now in the campaign. Let's, if we can, talk about one other aspect of overreach. We mentioned it last week with Penna Dexter, but I've got a commentary coming out with it soon, in which there was a new article that Madeline Kearns wrote called The Overreach of the LGBTQ Activism. And she points out that what we are starting to see right now are those who initially were very supportive of the idea of same-sex marriage because the argument was equality. Who's against equality? Why should I prevent someone from them marrying somebody that they love, even if they're of the same gender? And so the younger generation sort of bought into that and said, you know what, that's probably okay. I have no problem with that. And the younger you are, the more likely you are to accept LGBTQ ideas, labels, and activism until recently. GLAAD, which puts together what's called the GLAAD Accelerating Acceptance Report, has shown a significant decline in the number of young people. Their survey was of those 18 to 34-year-olds who feel comfortable interacting with LGBTQ people. The percentage dropped from two-thirds, 63% in 2016, to about half, 53%, to less than half, 45% in 2018. And so the decline is significant when you look at it over just a 3-year period. Where's it going to go in the future? And I think part of that has to do with the attitudes and the behavior of some of the activists, this sort of zero-sum game. And, of course, in this particular article, she spends some time talking about some of the LGBTQ politics, economics, and history, some of the rewriting of history, but also just the overplaying of their hands. And so I see a trend in the political realm in terms of overplaying their hands, in terms of what's happening in the Netroots Nation and the support of some of these progressive ideas in the presidential and even congressional campaigns. But you see the same kind of thing happening with what you might call LGBTQ overreach in the popular culture as well. So we'll be watching that. It's just another illustration of what happens when any political group or any cultural group overplays their hands. And I think we have some pretty good evidence of that actually transpiring not only in these campaigns, but also in the popular culture as well. Let's take a break, and when we come back, a couple of issues. First of all, Friday we did give you an opportunity to express your opinion to Starbucks about the kicking out of 6 police officers in Tempe, Arizona. And if you'd like to do that, we give you some suggested paragraphs you could put together, or you could write your own. And so that's still under the Take Action section. My Viewpoints commentary today is on Answering the New Atheist, some of the material that was published a while back by our good friends Sean McDowell and Jonathan Morrow. And so all of that is available at our website, pointofview.net. And as you go there, I hope you'll also click on that button that says donate, because we, after all, during the summer months, most importantly, need your financial support. So if you can help us out, certainly we would encourage you to click on that button and give. But most importantly, I hope that you'll take the time to find some of these articles, print them out, pass them around. And if you haven't subscribed to the Viewpoints commentary, I would encourage you to do that as well. We come back, we're going to talk with Pat Williams, again, the Senior Vice President for Orlando Magic, as we talk about his book, Character Carved in Stone. We'll be back right after this.
It wasn't long ago, it seemed, every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands, and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team, or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. I hope you had a good weekend. We have a lot to cover over the next couple of hours, and certainly we will get to all the things in the news, not the least of which is almost a kind of a civil war of ideas and words in the Democratic Party right now, showing up in Congress. Some of that surfaced in some tweets that came out Friday night from the Democrats towards each other, and some veiled threats and not so veiled threats. And that's what a lot of people, I think, would have been talking about today if it weren't for the tweets by the president, Donald Trump, which we will get to as well. As one pointed, as Democrats fight a civil war, Donald Trump runs into the battlefield, and so we'll get into some of that a little bit later. Of course, we also have the roundup of illegal immigrants through ICE, and so that is another conversation we're going to have. And so there are lots of issues we will indeed be getting to sooner or later. But one of the things we had scheduled, and I think it was very fortunate, is, if nothing else, a good way to kind of set the tone for the way in which leaders should be acting. And that is based upon this new book that's been out a couple of months, but I wanted to spend some time talking about it today with Pat Williams. It's entitled Character Carved in Stone: The 12 Core Virtues of West Point That Builds Leaders and Produces Success. And if you are not familiar with him, he's been on the program with us before, Senior Vice President of the NBA Orlando Magic. Matter of fact, next week I'm going to be up at Camp of the Woods with Norm Sanju. Of course, he's a good friend of Pat Williams. He's had more than 50 years of professional sports experience, has written more than 100 different books. Perhaps you're familiar with some of those, Coach Wooden. And, of course, this book in particular is one that I know you're going to really enjoy. So, Pat Williams, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View. Well,
Kerby, it's nice to catch up with you as well, and thanks for that little plug about Camp of the Woods, my friend Norm Sanju. This is going to be a good visit. Thanks a million.
Yes, Ravi Zachariason are teaching next week. Looking forward to it. But I'm here this week, and if you go to West Point, and I have done so, you will notice that there are a number of benches, 12 of them, that actually are sitting there, and each one of them have one of these leadership virtues: compassion, courage, dedication, determination, dignity, discipline, integrity, loyalty, perseverance, responsibility, service, and trust. And you came up with the idea, and I just think it's outstanding, to take each one of those core virtues of West Point and talk about how that was instrumental in the lives of some of those people that went to West Point, and more importantly, how we can apply those principles to us today. So kudos for coming up with such a great idea, and this is why I really commend the book to all of our listeners.
Well, thank you, Kerby. It was a few years ago that I was invited up to West Point to speak to the sports teams there before the start of the season, and I had a wonderful experience doing that. And then one of the athletes gave me a tour of the campus, which is a thrilling experience, by the way. We ended up in a little park called Trophy Point. It looks out over the historic Hudson River, and it was in that park that I noticed a series of these stone benches. Well, I counted them, and there were 12 of them. And for some reason, I decided to look closer at one of the benches, and I noticed at the end of the bench, at the end of each ends of the bench, there was a word carved into that bench. And that prompted me to go look at the second bench. And yes, there was another word, a different word carved into that bench. And that went on for all 12 benches. These words that you just read were carved onto those benches. Well, I thought there has to be a backstory here. And as we investigated, there was a backstory. And here it was. The West Point class of 1934, on their 50th anniversary, which would be 1984, they decided to donate these benches as a gift to the school. And they also decided that based on their experience in World War II and leading in the Korean War, that these were the 12 most important words that they had learned in their lives as leaders. Well, when I discovered this, Kerby, my immediate reaction was, boy, this is a well-kept secret. I had never heard of this, and I thought it was important. I thought this was really significant. And so we went to our publisher, and we said, in a perfect world, we would take each one of those words, do a chapter on each one of the words, and in the process, find a West Point graduate over the years who best modeled that particular word. And then the other dream wish was, let's get Mike Krzyzewski, the Duke coach, and a West Point graduate. Let's see if he would do the foreword for us. Well, he readily agreed to do that, and the publisher liked the idea of doing a book based on those 12 words, and the end result was this book that has come out, Character Carved in Stone.
Well, it's just an outstanding book. And again, people can find it in the local bookstore. We have a link to it as well, so you can get it both in hardback or in Kindle. And Coach K, for just a minute, since you mentioned that, he was a point guard at Army. I don't know if everybody knows that. He was also the coach at Army. And he even has a little bit of a story about how he really didn't want to go there. He wanted to play basketball, and the idea of going to the military didn't intrigue him, but his parents thought he was stupid, and he could understand them talking about this in Polish in the kitchen, and ended up there and was the best decision he ever made. So that is just one of the many stories that are in here. And again, we don't have time for all 12, but I thought I'd pick out one or two, and one of those is the first one, compassion. I think if I went out right now, Pat, and asked people, what do you think would be some of the key words for people in the military? Well, they're going to come up with words like courage and dignity and discipline, maybe integrity, perseverance. Probably they're not going to think the word compassion. And that was the first chapter of your book.
Well, it was, and the person that we plugged in there seemed even more far-fetched. That was General Ulysses S. Grant, a West Point graduate, who, of course, was the hero for the North in the Civil War, what later became a U.S. president. Well, when you study Grant, we found that he was definitely a leader of compassion. Yes, he sent many of his soldiers into battle, and many of those men were killed, but he had great compassion for all of them. He had great compassion for animals, particularly horses. He was a great horseman. The story is told of one of his soldiers on the side of the road whipping and beating his horse unmercifully. And Grant exploded in anger, went over to that soldier, challenged him, told him if he ever saw that happen again, he would do this, that, or the other to him. He had great compassion in his home. He had a marriage that was absolutely strong. He and Julia Grant had a great marriage. And the story is told that Julia had an eye disorder in one of her eyes, and she was very sensitive about it. But Grant didn't care. He just told her how beautiful she was and how much he loved her, and never brought attention to that eye disorder.
Very good. And then, let me take a break, and we want to continue our conversation with Pat Williams. By the way, we have a link to patwilliams.com and information about the book, Character Carved in Stone. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Many of the best-selling books of the last decade have been written by the new atheist. Although you may never meet any of these authors, you will certainly interact with skeptics who use their arguments. One of the best Christian books to help refute many of the arguments by these new atheists is the book Is God Just a Human Invention, written by Sean McDowell and Jonathan Morrow. They answer 18 of the most cited arguments used by the new atheists against religion and especially against Christianity. One of those arguments is found in the title of the book, that God is merely a human invention. Sigmund Freud wrote that religious beliefs are illusions, fulfillments of the oldest, strongest, and most urgent wishes of mankind. In other words, we project the existence of God based upon a human need. It is wish fulfillment. We wish there would be a God, so we assume that he exists. As McDowell and Morrow point out in their book, there are many good reasons to reject this idea. One objection is that Freud's argument begs the question. In other words, he assumes there is no God and then merely tries to find an explanation for why someone would believe in God anyway. The projection theory can cut both ways. If you argue that humans created God out of a need for security, then you could just as easily argue that atheists believe there is no God because they want to be free and unencumbered by a creator who might make moral demands on them. It's not surprising to read how many prominent atheists in the past have acknowledged just that. They wanted their sexual freedom and found that required that they reject the idea of God. Paul teaches in the book of Romans that fallen individuals suppress the truth in unrighteousness. The Bible also has a good explanation for why most people believe in God. The writer of Ecclesiastes observes that God has set eternity in the hearts of men. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism. Viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
In our conversation for a few more minutes with Pat Williams, again, Senior Vice President of the NBA's Orlando Magic, one of the most sought-after motivational speakers. And Pat, I might just mention we have a link to patwilliams.com, and people can see some of the speeches that many of us have heard over the years on leadership and teamwork and all of the rest. And this is how this book fits together, because some of these particular virtues relate to leaders, but almost all of them in one way or another relate to being part of a team. And for an individual who has been involved with so many different teams over the years, not only, of course, sports teams, but other kinds of people in teamwork, if you have these virtues, you'll have a dynamic team. And if you don't have these virtues and instead have vices, you're going to have a lot of problems, aren't you?
Oh, I think that's true. I've often said that extreme dreams depend on teams. We can have the biggest dreams in the world, but if we can't pull a team together around us, those dreams are not going to really function, or they're not going to come true. I've written extensively on teamwork, team building, speak about it in the corporate world as well. And I've been in the team building business, well, my entire adult life, since I was 22 years old and entered professional sports for the first time. So I've been studying what it takes to build great teams and what great teams consist of, and it's an important part of my life.
You know, one of the very important virtues that applies to all of us, even if you don't go to West Point, is integrity, what you call honest and true. And integrity really is who you are when nobody's looking. And, you know, integrity is the same word as like integer or integral or integrated circuits. And it seems to me that you give an example there of Eisenhower, but there's so many individuals that had integrity, and at a time when there is so much conflict and divisiveness and so much sinful activity, we need to hear this message of integrity more than ever, don't we?
Well, we do, and in that chapter, we did feature Dwight D. Eisenhower. Eisenhower has been quoted as saying that the chief attribute of leadership is integrity. He said whether you're leading on the football field or a work gang, or whether you're leading in the military or in politics, you can't lead effectively if you don't have integrity. And as you pointed out, integrity comes from the root word integer, which means one, which would lead to a word, for example, like integrated. An integrated society is one society. So a leader of integrity, well, there's consistency to her life. Walk and talk match. Leaders of integrity are not talking one way and then leading completely in the opposite direction. And so Eisenhower really modeled that. We tell a number of stories about Ike. The one I liked the best was during his time in the Philippines with Douglas MacArthur and other American leaders. The Philippine government was so grateful for the help that our leaders were passing on in the Philippines that they presented MacArthur with $500,000, $500,000 back in the 1930s. Can you imagine?
Yes.
And MacArthur accepted it. The same offer was made to Eisenhower. He declined. And he was making, a pittance, as a military leader. He declined. He just did not feel right about it. He thought it would lead perhaps to some compromises in his leadership. And he very, very politely declined.
Very good story.
We in writing this book, that really hit us directly.
Great
this
story.
Man
yes.
was a leader of integrity.
Well, let's, if we can, jump to responsibility, because there, first of all, you start off with Coach K when he was at West Point, where he uses, says, there's no excuse, sir. But then you later do talk about General MacArthur. Since we said something negative about General MacArthur, maybe we could talk about this idea of responsibility. But you start out by talking about Mike Krzyzewski, shows up at West Point. Some of the upperclassmen say your shoes are cruddy, you're a crudball. How did that happen? No excuse, sir. And that's one of the lessons that I think you learn at West Point. It's one of the lessons I think we need to teach our young people today, don't you think? Well, there's no question. I am concerned about this society and the importance of taking responsibility. This was done well and I did it. This was done poorly and I did it. But in either case, I am responsible. So in a nutshell, here's young Mike, from the south side of Chicago. There he is on the campus, 17 years old. He's walking across the campus on the way to the classroom. His uniform is perfect. His shoes are brightly shined. And an upperclassman steps in a puddle of gook, splashes it on his shoes. Young Mike has a decision to make. Quickly go back to the room and get things straightened out, or attempt to get to the next class and take care of it there. But at that precise moment, an upperclassman stops him, challenges him on the shoes, and Mike says, well, sir, I was just walking across the... And the upperclassman stopped him, cold, and said, when you are challenged by an upperclassman or an officer, you have one of three answers. Yes, sir. No, sir. No excuse, sir. Well, and since then, Kerby, they've added a fourth for this generation. I do not understand, sir. Back in the day of Mike, it was three answers. Yeah. And Mike said that was a turning point in his life. He said from that point on, he realized that he was responsible. Well said.
For all these issues that went on in his life.
Well, again, there are 12 of these virtues. We could spend hours on it, but I want people to buy the book, read it, apply it, begin to develop it in their workplace, in their church, in their family. But, Pat, just before I let you go, let's talk about some of the resources. First of all, the book is available in hardback or Kindle. It's been out for a couple of months, so people should be able to find it in the local bookstore, but we have a link there as well. But if people would like to know more about you, if they would like to schedule you to speak, if they would like to watch some of your videos or read some of the other books, they can go to patwilliams.com. But share with us for just a minute what is available there, because there's a great number of resources that I think people are going to find very helpful.
Well, I speak primarily on leadership and teamwork and winning, extreme winning. Those are the three. Now, in the Christian world, Kerby, I can come to any church and speak about lead like Jesus. I can share my own personal testimony. I can share some thoughts about the best ways that I've learned to read the Bible and study Scripture. So I've tried to be well-rounded in that regard. Always love to hear from people and love to come to your event.
And I might just mention that some of the other things that you have are, for example, some things on the difference you make, the sweet spot for success. I know you've spoken on Disney's 5 Secrets to Success and things like that. So they're just all sorts of resources that I think would be very available if you have an event that maybe you would want him to come to, a church, men's retreat, or those. But let me, as we wind down the interview here, mention that this book is published by Revell. It's been out for a couple of months, endorsed by all sorts of individuals that have served in the military, some of whom who are actually Apollo pilots, and we're going to be thinking about Apollo 11 this week on the 50th anniversary of the launching of Apollo 11, and as we come to the end of the week, the 50th anniversary of the first man walking on the moon. So you're going to just find this book very helpful. And Pat Williams, it's always a delight to hear from you, and I'm thrilled that you wrote this book, and it's something should have been written a long time ago, and thank you for taking the time to do it, and thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thanks for the invite, Kerby, and have a great time at camp.
Looking forward to it. Let's take a break, and when we come back, you know what? We have a lot to talk about. First of all, we were going to be talking about, obviously, a tremendous amount of almost civil war that's developed within the Democrat Party. That will be part of our topic. But all these tweets by the president, we've got to get into that as well. Of course, we have a roundup of some of those individuals who are supposed to be deported, and we'll explain more about what that entails. And so we have a lot to cover, so we will do so. And, of course, at any point, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll get into what was actually taking place last Friday night, the tweet war first within the Democrat Party. Then on Sunday, the tweet war that was started by President Donald Trump. And if you would like to join us with your comments or questions, reflection, we certainly do welcome those calls. 1-800-351-1212. If you'd like to know a little bit more about some of the things we're going to be talking about, we've posted a couple of articles about the divided Democrat Party, some of the conflict with Nancy Pelosi, and, of course, all of the comments that have surfaced since some of those tweets by President Donald Trump. We have a lot to cover. We will do so right after this.
So you sit down and do your budget, and you look at all your monthly costs and your bills and your income, and it seems like there's never quite enough. You know what would really help? Finding $500 a month to help balance things out. That is the typical savings, $500 a month for a family when you switch to MediShare for your health care. And when it comes to healthcare sharing ministries, MediShare is really the gold standard. It's been around for 25 years and has more than 400,000 members. It's been around so long and grown so much because it works. And whether you're single or married or have kids, this could make sitting down to do a monthly budget a lot more fun. $500 a month can more than cover a car payment or pay back loans, whatever. So join MediShare and go out to dinner to celebrate. Here's the number to call. They are incredibly kind and helpful to talk to. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
Tired of fake news? Support truth. Join Point of View's Truth Team and bring healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team. pointofview.net/team or 800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Let's see if we can try to sort out some of the things that have been said over the last 48 hours. But again, there is what could have been discussed today and what will be discussed today. What could have been discussed if Donald Trump's tweets had not come out were the fact that there was a tweet war already brewing. As a matter of fact, on our Friday weekend edition, Kelly Shackelford, Penna Dexter, and I talked about this. Well, Friday night, it really kind of reached critical mass because you had an official Twitter account that is the official account of the House Democratic Caucus that accused the chief of staff for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of racism against another Democrat. Then you had all sorts of Democrats back and forth accusing others, some saying, well, you're not woke enough. There had been threats by the so-called Gang of Four, also referred to as the Squad. And if you're not familiar with those, of course, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, Ayanna Pressley, as well as Rashid Tlaib. But anyway, those individuals had been saying, you guys aren't moving fast enough. We can primary you. And so then you had a high-ranking New York Democrat implying that primaries go both ways, which is kind of a veiled, not so veiled threat, by the way, against the Gang of Four. And so this could have been the discussion. And if you go to our website today, you're going to see a couple of articles that I think you're going to find very helpful. One of those articles is by Matthew Continetti. I entitled it The Divided Democrat Party. The original article was entitled Pelosi's House of Pain. We will get to that. And then we also have another piece by Derek Hunter, and I even have a commentary coming out next week based upon that, which is entitled Arrogance and Ignorance. But it all gets back to some of the back and forth that took place between Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Speaker Nancy Pelosi, because Nancy Pelosi had made a comment earlier in the week that indeed these are four individuals. There are only 4 votes. They don't have as much influence as they think they do. And that led to, of course, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez saying when these comments first started, I kind of thought that she, that is Speaker Pelosi, was keeping the progressive flank at arm's distance in order to protect the more moderate members, which I understood. But the persistent singling out, she said, it got to the point where it was just outright disrespectful, the explicit singling out of a newly elected women of color, which is, again, kind of a veiled, not so veiled threat that basically you're a racist. So that's kind of where this all uncorked, if you will. And so that was what I thought was going to be kind of our conversation today. That was accentuated by the fact that this weekend you had the gathering, the progressive gathering called Netroots Nation. If you're not familiar with them, that's just a lot of the progressive activists gather together. Thousands of people get together every single year. This year, the founder of Daily Coos, the liberal blog, now he uses some words I won't use here, but I'll give you some of his comments about the fact that he felt that Nancy Pelosi was unfair. He says she doesn't act this way when blue dogs, that'd be blue dog Democrats, the so-called moderate Democrats, say, I'll leave out some of the words he says, about other Democrats and about the party and consistently criticize the party. For some reason, she's singling out these 4 for a special brand of conflict. And they also were very critical of the speaker in terms of the fact that she hasn't been willing to pursue impeachment against President Donald Trump. She has been very slow to embrace ideas like the Green New Deal or Medicare for all and all the rest. She allowed a vote that went forward. And of course, Ilhan Omar said that a vote for that bill to fund these detention centers was a vote to keep kids in cages and terrorize immigrant communities. And so this was really kind of blowing up over the weekend. You have the founder of She the People, who was a moderator of one of these events, interestingly enough, said the women of color who entered Congress, they're more than 4 votes, which is a direct comment about, of course, Speaker Nancy Pelosi. For millions of us, they represent blood, sweat, and tears for us to have representation. They represent the best of American democracy. So that's kind of where I thought we were headed until President Donald Trump decided to put out some of these tweets, and this, of course, changed everything. He called out a progressive Democrat congresswoman. If he'd even said just a congresswoman, I think he might have gotten away with it, although he still would have been criticized. But this one just went over the top because he said he called them out for viciously telling the people of the United States how our government is to be run. So why don't they go back and help fix the totally broken and crime-infested places from which they came, and then come back and show us how it's done? Okay, first of all, these are women of color. Second of all, 3 of them are American citizens because they were born here. The 4th became an American citizen who came here from Somalia. It is wrong at so many levels, you can't even begin to talk about it, but it also kind of violates one of kind of the standard principles of common sense. You don't have to be a political activist. You don't have to have ever run a campaign to recognize a few things I'm going to say. The first, you probably learned in grade school. If not, you learned it in middle school, or you certainly learned it in high school. And that is a principle. When your opponents are fighting each other, just stay out of the fray. There was essentially almost a civil war of words taking place in the House of Representatives between Democrats. This would be a good time to just stay out, not say anything. But nevertheless, when your opponents are fighting each other, principle number 1, stay out of the fray. Number 2, when your opponents are firing at you, don't give them more ammunition. And some of the reactions, of course, I'll just mention the Democrats. Now the Republicans are coming in with the same kind of comments, but the ones I happen to have here, Representative Hakeem Jeffries, Trump is a racial arsonist. Of course, Democrat presidential candidate Bernie Sanders said, when I call the president a racist, this is what I'm talking about. And so a lot of this surfaced because of what is happening right now with the so-called squad. Some people call them the squad, some call them the Gang of Four. But again, that's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, and Ayanna Pressley. Now, what you're talking about are, first of all, 2 of these individuals are indeed socialist. Ocasio-Cortez and Tlaib actually are members of the Democratic Socialists of America. So that certainly is one part of it. Then you have Ilhan Omar, who's not from this country, Muslim, and has made some statements that oftentimes are perceived as anti-Semitic. So the reaction oftentimes so far has been, well, the press will either ignore them or sometimes just try to explain them away. But that doesn't work very long, because ultimately what you end up with are some comments that deserve some kind of attention. And the reaction up until fairly recently, even from some of the Democrat leadership, is we'll just ignore it. It's not going to do any good to talk about that. But Derek Hunter in the piece, it's the second one I've posted here, said that this group has strung together an uninterrupted string of gaffes, stupid statements, and racist comments that would humiliate your average teenager. When taken together, they maybe deserve some reaction. And when, of course, Nancy Pelosi started to react, it just really kind of took off. And so as a result, this is where you find the ongoing conflict that is taking place. And in the midst of this, the president inserted himself when it wasn't helpful to do so and said it in such a way that will probably give whoever becomes his opponent in the general election enough cannon fodder to shoot at him for a long period of time. Now, before we take a break, to be fair, let me at least give the other side. Mark Short, who is the chief of staff actually for the vice president, Mike Pence, he was trying to defend this. I don't agree with the defense, but I want to at least put it on the table. He was telling reporters that these comments by President Donald Trump were very specific comments being made about Representative Ilhan Omar, who's, of course, from Somalia, and he was not making a universal statement. The problem with that is it's a universal statement. You can go back and look at the tweets. He says Congresswomen, W-O-M-E-N. If he had just said Congresswoman, he still would have been criticized, but it's not the same when you tell 4 of these individuals, 3 of whom were born in the United States, to go back to the country you came from. What are you talking about? I guess you're talking about your own country. And so he says, I don't think the president's intent was in any way racist. The decision by the president to choose Elaine Chao, who was born outside the country, who as his transportation secretary, is an illustration. Not a great illustration since she's married to the Senate Majority Leader, but nevertheless, he tried to say the administration is welcoming of all nationalities. So you think, well, maybe the president just back off. No, the latest one, at least I have in front of me here, was, the radical left congresswoman will not apologize to our country, the people of Israel, and even the office of president for the foul language they have used and the terrible things they've said. So many people are angry at them and their horrible and disgusting actions. Let's take a break. I'd love to get your comments. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. 2 issues on the table and many others that we will get to in the next hour. First is the division that has taken place in the Democrat Party, especially because of some of the visibility of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and the so-called Gang of Four, or the Squad. These are individuals who in the past probably would not have had much power. As a matter of fact, I think it's fair to say that many of the other first-term members of Congress don't have that much power. They're oftentimes seen as backbenchers. They don't have prestigious committee appointments. They don't get a lot of press. The exceptions, of course, are this gang of four. And even on the Republican side, Dan Crenshaw and some others have gotten some very good press and given some attention. But this is a concern for Democrats, and don't take my word for it. Yesterday, there was a very good article that pointed out that some of the Democrat leaders have been circulating a poll that went around last month, and it was looking at swing state voters. Over 1,000 of these individuals in the so-called swing states. Most of them, by the way, in this particular survey were white. Most of them had 2 years or less of college education. Just turns out what they dealt with. But I'll just quote from one of the Democratic leaders who said, if all voters hear about is AOC, that'd be Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, it could put the House majority at risk. Goes on to say she's getting all the news and defining everyone else's races. And so the concern is that if you begin to perceive her as the face of the Democrat Party, or even the new face of the Democrat Party, that isn't necessarily positive. Let me go to the poll to help you understand a little bit more about that. 3/4, more than 74% of the voters in the poll recognized who she was, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Only 22%, less than a quarter of them, had a favorable view of her. So 3/4 of them know of her. Only less than a fourth of them have a favorable view. Think about if she becomes the face of the Democrat Party, what that does for Democrats running in districts which, say Donald Trump won last time, districts which are maybe even skewed a little bit Republican or certainly aren't necessarily safe Democrat districts. It gets worse. When they talk about Ilhan Omar, who is the representative from Minnesota, individual was born in Somalia, came to this country, has become an American citizen. She was recognized by more than half, 53%, with only 9% of the people holding a favorable view of her, in large part because of some of what are perceived as anti-Semitic comments about how Jewish money is affecting our foreign policy. You know the list. And so this is one of the concerns that's sort of playing out right now in terms of not only the congressional districts, but what that might even mean for the presidential campaign. And if we look back and find that President Donald Trump fails to win re-election, we may look back at what happened this last weekend here in July as one of the reasons. Now, I'm the first to admit that what is said in July of 2019 has probably little impact in November of 2020. But I also recognize that comments and tweets like that are out there can become part of the campaign narrative against the president. And given the fact that they've already used a campaign narrative of Charlottesville, where he really wasn't saying something wrong, but has been twisted by Joe Biden and others to say that he really believes that there were good people on all sides, and he makes it very clear he's not talking about the white supremacists, but they've twisted it and used it that way. When you use these kinds of comments, don't you know, that's going to have an impact as well. One other comment I thought I would make just before we take a break, and then we'll take some of your phone calls. David French, who's been on the program with us before, put out a series of tweets, and I want to thank Andrew for his pointing those out to me, because he was saying that, again, the tweet about telling natural-born Americans to go back to the places they came from doesn't make a great deal of sense. But more importantly, what he was saying is we should, as he says here, show some kind of gratitude towards people that are here as immigrants. He said, I believe every American should be grateful for American liberty and opportunity, but the average immigrant citizen did more to earn their place than the average natural-born citizen. Here's his argument, sixfold. Number one, the average immigrant citizen exercised courage and grit to get here. Number two, learned a new language. Now, some came from a country where they already knew English, but most of them had to learn a new language. Number three, stay out of trouble and build a new life. Number four, become productive members of the community. Number five, take a test most Americans would fail. Let me stop for just a minute. I did a commentary a while back. Matter of fact, I think I've done two now, but one more recently, which I point out that especially the younger generation, when they were given a sample test, the citizenship test, a high percentage of them failed. People that are born in this country oftentimes know less about our history and our government than people who came here as naturalized citizens because they had to actually pass a test that most would fail, David French says. And number 6, swear an oath of allegiance. So the point he's making here is the average immigrant citizen did quite a bit to earn a place to become a citizen of the United States. Here he says, here's what I had to do to enjoy the blessing of American liberty. Number 1, survive labor and delivery. That's it. That's the whole thing. That was a good line. I've said before that oftentimes when I meet somebody who has actually become a naturalized citizen, I know that they probably know a lot more about this country. They probably know a lot more about our history. They probably know a lot more about our government. And they probably appreciate America even more than many of us that were born here and take it for granted. So nevertheless, that's kind of the situation we find ourselves in at the moment with some of the tweets. It was a place where there was a pretty good ongoing civil war right now between various Democrats. And as one columnist put it, only Donald Trump could figure out a way to unite the Democrats. And he did that with a series of tweets over the weekend. And maybe you have some comments about that as well. Speaking about immigrants, when we come back from the break, we want to talk a little bit about what is happening now with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, known as ICE. And that is their plans to begin to deport families. We're going to talk about what that means, the fact that it is not anything new. It is something that happened under President Barack Obama. It is something that has happened in the past under President Donald Trump, but now it's become quite a controversial issue. And actually, those that are being deported right now, in most cases, have a criminal record. And so we'll get into some of that and what that might mean, and then get into some other issues in the news. But if you would like to join our conversation as we go to a break, let me give you that opportunity. 1-800-351-1212. Love to hear some of your comments about immigrants, immigration, deportation, some of the conflict right now taking place in Congress, which I think is one of the reasons why almost nothing of substance is being passed out of the House of Representatives right now. There are investigations, there are subpoenas, there are hearings, but not much is happening. And so we have do-nothing Congress, and it'll be interesting to see how that plays out also in the next election. So we have a lot to cover. We will do so and talk about some of the other issues in the news. And if you'd like to join us, like I said, 1-800-351-1212. If you'd like to read some of the articles we've posted today, they're on our website, pointofview.net. My Viewpoints commentary today is the Answering the New Atheist, based on some of the great material in a book that came out by Sean McDowell and Jonathan Morrow. And we'll get into some of those issues as well a little bit later. We'll have a lot more to cover, but we'd love to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212. All the information we're talking about is at our website, pointofview.net. And we'll be back right after this.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @PointOfViewRTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Before we get back into some of the conversation we've had about the ongoing debate in the Congress and even some of the tweets by Donald Trump, I did want to mention what is happening right now with ICE. Again, these are some of the conversations we might have been having if it weren't for all the tweets that were back and forth, first between the Democrats Friday night and then the tweets by the president Saturday and Sunday. Really Sunday and Monday, if I want to be honest about that. But let's, if we can, for just a minute, talk about ICE. I know one of our callers wanted to address this issue, and that is the head of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which is called ICE, actually has begun moving forward with its efforts to deport families. These are specific orders which are actually accelerated, and I'll explain more about that in just a minute. The primary focus, interestingly enough, have been on about 10 different cities. And as a result, that is due to the fact that in many of those cities, they are sanctuary cities. Just a minute, I want to talk to one of our callers who wants to talk about how that is all being resisted in some of these cities, but also even on college. But we'll get into that in just a minute before I get to that phone call. And the advocates are, actually going out of their way to coach some of those people who might be deported about how they can prevent being captured, that they should not respond if agents knock on their door unless there's a warrant. And there are a number of mayors that have said that their cities would not cooperate with ICE. Now, the acting director of ICE, that is, again, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, said these were targets on what's called the accelerated docket of immigration court cases. These are predominantly individuals from Central America. Many of these even possibly go back a number of years. You've had similar operations like this, for example, in 2016 under President Barack Obama. Had them in 2017 under Donald Trump. The head, or the acting head of ICE, said that the family operation is nothing new. It's part of the day-to-day operations. We're trying to surge some additional resources to deal with this glut of cases that came out of the accelerated docket. But after this operation is over, he says these cases are still going to be viable cases. They'll be out there investigating and pursuing. And right now, most of the focus, not exclusively, but most of the focus, as I understand, and this seems to be in this article that we've posted on the website, so you can read it for yourself, is focusing on criminals, individuals that have been arrested, in some cases even convicted. And so when you have people say, we want to have these people stay in our country, going, I'm not so sure we do, but okay. And so there's, first of all, been a difficulty because some of the cities will not cooperate with immigrations and customs enforcement. But interestingly enough, a new twist has been that some of the hotels won't cooperate with that as well. And I'll get to that in just a minute. But I'm now also hear from one of our listeners talking about how in some cases, even some of the colleges are getting involved with this. So let's go to our first caller here in Georgia, WLPE. Tony, tell us your story.
My daughter is a graduate student of a university, and they received a letter today, or an online letter, that just said that, and first let me say that it's a school of law. She's going to school to be to get her master's in healthcare law.
Great.
And it said the School of Law does not ask its students, well, first it says, the School of Law will not collaborate with ICE to apprehend any student or member of the university community unless required by law. And I thought that ICE was law.
I just could have fooled me. You know, I mean, again, these part of the problem, Tony, is the fact that we have individuals who are supposed to be the law. That would be mayors of these cities, district attorneys in these cities, and others that have declared this city to be a sanctuary city. And so the word law has been kind of reinterpreted rather dramatically. And almost the implication is that if the law enforcement official is somehow tied to the Trump administration, we don't have to pay attention to them. It's not like people are saying, well, I'm going to exercise civil disobedience because I disagree with the policy. It's that you don't even have any authority over me. And it's like, this is almost one step further than what we've ever seen before. But here we go. This is one of the things I'm starting to see more and more. Some of these various advocates, even a member of Congress, saying, here, I'm going to show you how to either game the system with asylum or how to avoid being captured by ICE and deported. And so here's another example of one college, and I assume it's somewhere around the Georgia area there that is doing that, and I'm sure it's not the only one. So, Tony, I appreciate you calling. Go ahead.
Actually, it's not Georgia.
Okay, well, wherever it is. We'll keep it anonymous. We don't want to put them into a bad situation, but I'm not surprised wherever it happens to be that it's taking place. So thank you for sharing that.
I'd like to also add that she has to go like twice a year to the actual university for different events. And the very first event she went to, she said it was very disheartening because it was more like a Trump bashing conference.
Yep.
More than anything.
Oh, yeah.
And she said if she had known it was going to be like that, she may not have, continued to go there. But now she's so far in that.
Don't you dare show up with a hat that says "Make America Great Again." You will be hit in the face, perhaps. Certainly yelled at, shouted at, and spit on. So I know.
And it's very interesting that it's the School of Law.
No, I know. These are our future lawyers. These are our future judges. If a different person gets into the White House, we know the kind of judges that this president has put in, and we know how kind of judges the previous president put in. So you have your choice, and I have a pretty good idea what the judges would be like if one of these Democratic nominees becomes the next president. So pay attention.
Well, I want to ask if any of these schools get federal dollars.
Oh, they all do. Yeah, there's only, I think, only two schools in the country that I'm aware of that don't get some kind of federal benefit, and those are things like Hillsdale College or Grove City College that work so hard not to. So because they recognize it's the golden rule, he who has the gold makes the rules. And so they really work real hard as conservative schools to not take federal funds, but most of them do. Most of them do.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you. You've raised some really good points. And since we're coming up on a break, I guess I'll try to get back to them. But some of you might say, you mentioned hotels. Okay, I can do that real quickly. It turns out that because of these families, as they're being deported, they have to be temporarily housed. And since right now the family detention centers in Texas and Pennsylvania are pretty full, they wanted to house these families that are going to be deported in hotels until they could be transferred to a detention center. Well, the Marriott Hotel said they would not allow ICE to use its hotels for holding immigrants. So if ICE runs out of space, it might have to be forced to separate family members, because even now, at least one or two of the hotels are saying, nope, we're not going to help you either. This is what lawless looks like, and we'll come back and talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Many of the best-selling books of the last decade have been written by the new atheist. Although you may never meet any of these authors, you will certainly interact with skeptics who use their arguments. One of the best Christian books to help refute many of the arguments by these new atheists is the book Is God Just a Human Invention, written by Sean McDowell and Jonathan Morrow. They answer 18 of the most cited arguments used by the new atheists against religion and especially against Christianity. One of those arguments is found in the title of the book, that God is merely a human invention. Sigmund Freud wrote that religious beliefs are illusions, fulfillments of the oldest, strongest, and most urgent wishes of mankind. In other words, we project the existence of God based upon a human need. It is wish fulfillment. We wish there would be a God, so we assume that he exists. As McDowell and Murrow point out in their book, there are many good reasons to reject this idea. One objection is that Freud's argument begs the question. In other words, he assumes there is no God and then merely tries to find an explanation for why someone would believe in God anyway. The projection theory can cut both ways. If you argue that humans created God out of a need for security, then you could just as easily argue that atheists believe there is no God because they want to be free and unencumbered by a creator who might make moral demands on them. It's not surprising to read how many prominent atheists in the past have acknowledged just that. They wanted their sexual freedom and found that required that they reject the idea of God. Paul teaches in the book of Romans that fallen individuals suppress the truth in unrighteousness. The Bible also has a good explanation for why most people believe in God. The writer of Ecclesiastes observes that God has set eternity in the hearts of men. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism. Viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
In fact, once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Get to another phone call in just a minute, but just as we went to the break, I mentioned that at least Marriott hotels have said they would not allow ICE to use its hotels for holding immigrants. And first of all, they're a private company. They can decide what they want to do, so they're free to do so. And it's possible that they don't want to cooperate with ICE. It's possible that they would maybe want to cooperate with them, but they are afraid that these individuals might trash out their hotel or they don't like the security. There are a lot of reasons, but I think it's just interesting because, as this particular article that we've posted points out, if ICE runs out of space, it will be forced to separate some of the family members because there's only limited space now in some of the detention centers in places like Texas and Pennsylvania. And again, this is one of the things that the acting head of the agency, acting director, said, if hotels or other places do not want us to utilize that, it's almost forcing us, he says, into a situation where we're going to have to take one of the parents and put them in custody and separate them from the rest of the families. You just understand why they have to do that. There's been such a push at the border. There's so many people working their way through the system. There are so many individuals that need to be deported for very good reasons, by the way, not just the reasons that you probably will not hear mentioned in front of the mainstream media tonight. And meanwhile, you have all sorts of sort of open-bore activists ramping up efforts to prepare. They're circulating information. They're developing hotlines, public demonstrations, and all the rest to try to prevent the kind of deportations that have existed for some time. To be fair, some people have in the past criticized the Obama administration. There were some that even referred to him as the deporter-in-chief. But you probably didn't hear about that in the media because, after all, The mainstream media generally liked Barack Obama. They don't like Donald Trump, so they're making this seem like it is something very different than anything we've done before. I'm hoping that you've heard some of the back story there so that you can understand a little bit more about why that's taking place. Let's go back to the phones. We'll go to Nevada this time. Aaron, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hello.
Hello.
Well, I want to just say that I live in a foreign country. I happen to be in the States right now. I don't know anywhere, and I've traveled around the world, I don't know anywhere you can go to another country and get away with what's going on in this country. It's mind-boggling to me. And if you get in this country, it's a privilege, not a right. And ICE isn't coming knocking on the door for these people because they followed the rules. They didn't show up for court. They broke the rules. They don't care. They get in here and they don't follow the rules. Anybody who lives in this country has to follow the rules, but they don't seem to care. And what I really don't understand is the people of this country backing these people. They want to hide them. They want to protect them. They want to give them, anything and everything. And you're mentioning the Marriott Hotel to put them up in? Listen, Motel 6 too good for these kind of people.
Well, again, I'll give you the list by the end of the week. We'll have a list of the hotels that have told ICE we will not allow them in our facilities. And, of course, the other alternative is there are not a lot of kids in college right now, so we've got a lot of dormitories. I don't know how close you're located, the University of Nevada at Reno, the University of Nevada at Las Vegas. We can put them there. There are all sorts of places we can put them. I don't want to really put them in prison, but I do want to give them, an opportunity to have a nice bed and a place to eat and whatever. We will treat people well even as we deport them, but if we don't have those facilities, sooner or later, we've got to think about whether or not to take the person that is going to be deported and separate him or her from the families. And that's just reality of what we have right before our very eyes. So I don't know which country you're from, but your point's well taken, and that is try to get into any other country illegally. And you're going to be met at the border, not with somebody that's willing to put you up in a nice bed, and certainly not somebody that's going to say, well, come back in 3 weeks for your hearing on amnesty. They're going to probably just turn you away at the border and not even let you cross. But America has been very generous, but because of that, we're having a lot of people criticizing us for being a welcoming country because we do bring in 1 million people every single year legally, but we're getting to the point where we're bringing in almost 1 million people every year illegally, and we don't even know how many people there are because we've just been told by the Supreme Court we can't even ask in the census whether or not you're a citizen or not. So that's the circumstance we find ourselves in. So, Aaron, thank you for calling today.
All right, thank you.
Appreciate your comments. Sometimes it's helpful for somebody who's outside of the country to give us a little bit of perspective. Let me give you some perspective on this. A little bit later, I'm going to talk about LGBTQ overreach. I've got a commentary on that. There have been a lot of criticisms of Scarlett Johansson, the actress, and so we'll get into that. But just before we do so, Jim Garrity wrote a good piece today. You'll love the title. He just can't help himself. And again, he's saying the same thing a lot of us have said. By Saturday, the long simmering fight between Nancy Pelosi and her allies on one side and the squad associated with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on the other had risen to an angrier and more destructive level at the Netroots Nation Conference. I found this at the break, and he's saying the same kind of things that I've been saying. Talks about one of the representatives appeared to argue that Democrats who were critical of the freshmen were not authentic representatives of their respective minority groups. Then you have some others that have been kind of critical of that as well. African-American Democratic Representative Gregory Meeks is talking about an attempt to recruit a primary challenge to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. That had developed, as you well know, because she said, well, we can primary you. So now a black congressman, Democrat, talking about trying to find somebody to primary Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. By the way, I've said before, some of the most interesting conversation sometimes at Point of View takes place during the breaks, especially when we have a roundtable. And both Penna Dexter and Kelly Shackelford on Friday both said that they were pretty sure that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez probably will only be a one-term member of Congress, because they were pretty much assured that there would be somebody that would actually run against her in a primary. And that probably is going to be the case now because of what Gregory Meeks is doing as well. But let me go back to Jim Garrett. He said, as discussed at the end of last week, this sort of party-destroying fight is how an idea like identity politics begins to die when its own practitioners start to realize how inherently divisive it is, how subjective the definition of racism can become, how bad faith arguments can flourish, how quickly the accuser can become the accused, and how it reorganizes all discourse into a hierarchy of competing grievances, making cooperation almost impossible. And so as a result, the point he was making is that indeed you should take the time to just step away. And he even says there's the old maxim, sometimes attributed to Napoleon Bonaparte, never interfere with the enemy when he's in the process of destroying himself, which is very similar to my point that I made earlier. When opponents are fighting each other, stay out of the fray. And all of that was true until Sunday morning when President Trump chose to interfere, just as Democrats were in the process of destroying themselves, he says. And then he gives just some of the Sunday morning tweets. And again, the comment, of course, that he makes is when he talks about those individuals going back to the countries they came from. Well, again, you have Ilhan Omar, who, of course, was born in Somalia. Ocasio-Cortez was born in New York City. Rashida Tlaib was born in Detroit. And Ayanna Pressley was born in Cincinnati. 3 of the 4 originally came from the United States of America. Presumably, Trump doesn't mean that our government is a complete and total catastrophe, the worst, most corrupt and inept in the world. Can't even finish that with a straight face. But nevertheless, Jim Garrity's having some fun, as we've been having. You got to laugh at some of this because it's just pathetic. But again, it's fair to read his remarks as contending that Tlaib should return to the Palestinian territories, because after all, her parents did immigrate from there. Ocasio-Cortez should return to Puerto Rico, where her mother was born. Puerto Ricans have been U.S. citizens really since 1917. And Presley should return to somewhere in Africa, even though her mothers were U.S. citizens. And again, he's talking about how the tweet, of course, doesn't make any sense. But the bigger point he's making is he just could not help himself. And so Jim Garrity is writing now today some of the things I just already talked about in the first hour of how this, first of all, just interrupted a process that probably will unfold pretty quickly, but nevertheless a process that illustrates again why it would be wise if the president were just to stay out of the issue entirely. As I've said before, you learned back in grade school, certainly middle school, when your opponents are fighting each other, stay out of the fray. And when they're shooting at you, don't give them more ammunition. And he violated both of those well-worn, wise principles. They're now talking about impeaching Donald Trump. I'll talk about that right after this.
So you sit down and do your budget, and you look at all your monthly costs and your bills and your income, and it seems like there's never quite enough. You know what would really help? Finding $500 a month to help balance things out. That is the typical savings, $500 a month for a family when you switch to MediShare for your health care. And when it comes to healthcare sharing ministries, MediShare is really the gold standard. It's been around for 25 years and has more than 400,000 members. It's been around so long and grown so much because it works. And whether you're single or married or have kids, this could make sitting down to do a monthly budget a lot more fun. $500 a month can more than cover a car payment or pay back loans, whatever. So join MediShare and go out to dinner to celebrate. Here's the number to call. They are incredibly kind and helpful to talk to. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
Tired of fake news? Support truth. Join Point of View's Truth Team and bring healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team or 800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this.
You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll get into this in just a minute, but Representative Al Green in the state of Texas said that he plans to force a vote on impeachment. You might remember last year he forced a vote on impeachment. At that time, he had 58 Democrats voting for impeachment of the president. And his argument is that because of this tweet by the president, maybe we'll get enough votes to actually impeach the president, which, if indeed that were to take place, would then go over to the Senate, would be mostly a show vote because there's no way in which the president would be removed from office in the Senate. But I'll get into all the details in that in just a minute. Let's take some more phone calls, though. First, James in Texas, listening on KCTA. James, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate your program. I just wanted to comment about your take on the latest Trump tweet, specifically for the four Democrats known as the Squad.
The Squad or the Gang of Four. Yeah. What would you say?
Well, the whole situation is Trump doesn't want to be explicitly clear about the country they're coming from, because his whole intention was to keep the Democrats' hair on fire and keep Nancy Pelosi together with them and responsible for what they do. So, it's her great grandkids in the big party there. And
well, for the moment, he has unified the Democratic Party. That's one of the things that people have been using, and actually forced Nancy Pelosi to sort of defend Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I don't think that's going to last very long, but this president is quite willing to say some oftentimes outrageous things to kind of keep in the news. And if, like you said, maybe that caused the hair to be on fire, but I just think this is going to be campaign rhetoric that is going to come back and haunt him. So, James, I appreciate your phone call, and that opens up a line. If you'd like to join us, I'll get to some of those calls in just a minute, 1-800-351-1212. But let me take about the latest one, and that is it possible that a successful vote against Donald Trump, a vote for impeachment, would take place without these tweets? Doubtful. Will it take place because of these tweets? Unlikely, but you never know, because today, Al Green, he is the Democrat from the state of Texas, said that he plans to force a vote on impeachment this month because he is convinced that these inflammatory tweets about the progressive Democratic congressman to go back to where they came from is probably enough now to win enough of his fellow Democrats. And so he's going to force a vote on impeachment. Now, this is not the first time. Last year, he was, or actually 2 years ago, I take that back, voted 2 years ago. Yes, it's amazing. That actually was 2 years ago. He forced a vote on impeachment in 2017. And at that time, he had 58 Democrats supporting that effort. Okay. Well, he feels like this time it might be the case. So if you followed his tweets, I don't, but I have a copy of it here. It's hashtag racist president, hashtag impeach now. I will again this month bring impeachment to a vote on the floor of the U.S. House of Representatives for bigotry and policy harmful to our society. And then he had a press conference, which was streamed on Facebook Live, in which he says he plans to move forward with Congress to get a vote on impeachment before they break for the August recess, adding to tolerate bigotry is to perpetuate bigotry, especially when you can do something about it. So he goes on to say, I'm a member of the House of Representatives, and I, as a member, can do something about it. He goes on to say, each member of the House of Representatives can bring articles of impeachment to the floor of the House of Representatives. I'm here today to tell you, again, to bring articles of impeachment to the floor of the House of Representatives. And so, again, the argument that's being made is that this kind of a comment would make him unfit to hold office. tough argument to make. You may not like what the president says. There are a lot of tweets that all of us wish he had never made. This is certainly in that list. But again, will you get to that? Because the last time The Hill, and this is actually reported in thehill.com, The Hill is kind of the journal record for The Hill, Congress. The last time they did a survey of Democrat lawmakers, because I can't imagine a Republican voting for this. So not, Will Hurd, maybe. I don't know. He said some things today, so possibly. But the last time they did a survey, they found about 80 Democrat lawmakers endorse the idea of an impeachment inquiry, which is up from the 58 that voted for it 2 years ago. So we'll see. But nevertheless, you have to ask the question, would this call for an impeachment of the president go anywhere if the president had not tweeted what he did on Sunday and then even kind of doubled down on it Monday? And I think the answer is probably wouldn't have gone very far at all. I did mention Will Hurd. Let's give him credit. A handful of Republicans have criticized, it says, Donald Trump over the tweets. Will Hurd went so far as calling the tweets racist. And so he's a Republican. And so that's part of it as well. And just an illustration, if nothing else, for what we have taking place right now. Let's go back to the phones, and we'll go to Georgia this time, WLPE. Pam, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
Yes, I enjoy your program. I try and listen every day when I can. I just thought it was sort of ironic that Representative Green is screaming bigotry and racism over the president's tweets. He can be fiery, but I would not call President Trump a racist. I would, however, call the two Muslim women, Tlaib and Omar in particular, who made those outrageous anti-Semitic comments. I'd like to know, where was Representative Green? I didn't hear a single word from him about this.
Good line. Good line. And that's kind of what I said. I've said this so often when people on the opposite side say, I'm just outraged by Donald Trump and what he's doing with deportation. I always say, are you aware that actually probably more deportations took place in the latter term of Barack Obama? Well, that was different. Why? Well, because it was Barack Obama, okay. I mean, everybody's got their tribe, and I try to play it straight sometimes. I get people upset because I do. But, this idea that, I don't like Donald Trump's narcissism, but you were okay with Barack Obama's narcissism because, he was, as well. I mean, most presidents are, let's face it. That's pretty true. Well, that's different, and this is the same kind of thing. If you were upset about some of the things that Ilhan Omar has said in the past, I think that gives you a platform to then be upset about some of the things Donald Trump has said. But when you aren't, and you're only looking out for your own tribe or your own political party, it doesn't have a lot of currency with me. At least that's my perspective.
It's tearing our country apart, and basically I'm putting the buck at Congress's door this time. And the way that they're encouraging people who apparently, from what I have heard on the news, a lot of these people that are being rounded up are criminals. I mean, they're here illegally, yes, but they've committed crimes when they were here before.
We were talking about that with Aaron. He was talking about they didn't show up for their hearing, and that is true. That's reason enough for us to go find you, and you don't show up for a hearing. There are people that go out to try to find you. So this is what we do for the American citizens, but this is much more, because what we see right now, and again, I'm just taking this from the acting director of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and also the president, Donald Trump, who said they're focused on criminals as much as we can, because that's the point. Right now, they're going after what you might call the low-hanging fruit, those individuals who have either been arrested for a crime or in some cases prosecuted, maybe even sentenced for a crime, and then they are out in the general public. And so when people say, we want these people in our community, I'm going, no, not really. I'd like to send them back to the country they came from. I mean, they may be drug rentlers, they may be sex traffickers. I don't know what they are. They are all sorts of things. But this is not a misdemeanor that we're going after some of these people for right now. Some of these people are people that we want to be out of the country. And if they're not in the country, we want to put them in jail because they are dangerous people, and we shouldn't have them in our society. Well,
correct.
Pam, you got a great point. Where was Representative Green, Al Green, when some of these other statements were being made? So, good point. So, thank you for calling in today.
Thank you.
Well, again, once I've said this many times before, we have so many smart people in the listening audience, and so we will certainly continue to talk about that. Let me, when I come back, though, I just thought I would deal with one more issue. We've talked about sort of this overreach with some of these political parties, but I wanted to change that just for a minute to talk about the overreach of the LGBT community and the overreach of the so-called woke community. Because we are seeing more and more evidence that some people in the political realm, as well as the cultural realm, have overplayed their hands. We'll talk about that right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. One of the things I've said today is there are all sorts of things we were going to talk about, but of course Donald Trump's tweet kind of changed everything. And one of those is by Jarrett Stepman and what he found at a recent conference on socialism. And then I want to talk about LGBTQ overreach. First of all, he went to this socialist conference, and to give you a feel for the conference, the tagline for the conference was "No borders, no bosses, no binaries." Yep, you can't make this stuff up. And again, it was made up of a number of people who are Democrat socialists, but not exclusively. There were a lot of other individuals as well. Now, the no binaries, I thought it was kind of interesting because he said, they had some of these multi-occupancy men and women's restrooms, which were relabeled gender neutral, with men and women using both. Interestingly enough, the signs above the door were still labeled with the traditional men's and women's signs until they were covered up with homemade labels. One of the labels read, "The bathroom has been liberated from the gender binary." So, again, I'm sure your daughter, your wife, your mother is going to really appreciate that. Here are some of his takeaways. Number one, they're serious about socialism. He said that in one of the panels he attended, every one of the speakers quoted from Karl Marx, brought their ideology into the basis of all of this. Number two, the issue of gender and identity politics was ascendant. One of the panels was on social reproduction theory and gender liberation, addressed how traditional families reinforce capitalism, and contended that the answer was simply to abolish families. Matter of fact, one of the things they said is pregnancy becomes a tool of oppression because women who get pregnant and then engage in childrearing are taken out of the workforce at a prime productive ages and then taken care of as an economic provider. And so this is the place in which they said gender binary is being reinforced. Number three, open borders is becoming a litmus test. I think we found that out. If you don't believe in open borders, you're a racist and a xenophobe. Number four, clickbait communism is being used to propagandize young Americans. That is, they're trying to find ways to make communism and socialism more favorable to the young generation. Number five, the green movement is red. No surprise there. A lot of what is being promoted for the so-called Green New Deal and climate change is really an attempt to try to implicate and to introduce various kinds of red ideas, if you will. And six, socialism can't be ignored as a rising ethos on the left. According to a recent Gallup survey, 4 in 10 Americans have a positive view of socialism. Another Gallup poll indicated that many associate socialism with vague notions of equality rather than government control over the means of production in the economy. One of the reasons we've produced a little booklet on capitalism and socialism is because we recognize so many young people simply don't understand what socialism is all about. So that is just a few of the takeaways from the Socialism Conference. Wish we had more time, but Donald Trump kind of changed that today. But I did want to get into this idea of overreach. We talked about this on Friday, but I came back and even did a commentary. Will come out next week. Madeline Kearns talks about what she calls the overreach of LGBTQ activism, because there's this survey done by GLAAD, which is a gay organization. It's called the GLAAD Accelerating Acceptance Report, and it shows a significant drop in young people, that'd be those 18 to 34 years of age, who feel comfortable interacting with LGBTQ people. The percentage dropped from 2/3, like 63% in 2016, to half, 53% in 2017, to less than half, 45% in 2018. And it's continuing to drop. And part of that has to do with the fact that many of these LGBTQ activists are turning off a generation that originally supported their demands. When the demands were equality, well, who's against equality? When the demand was, look, we just want same-sex marriage. Well, who am I to say that you shouldn't be able to marry somebody that you love? But then when they started seeing how much the LGBTQ activists have been bullies and saying that, a florist, a baker, a photographer, whatever, can't do what they want to do unless they cower to what you want, there's the case. And so there's a piece also by Madeline Kearns, "The mob comes for Scarlett Johansson again and wins again." And this is a good example, she says, of political correctness kills art, rendering it bland, why she thought it was encouraging the other day when Hollywood A-lister Scarlett Johansson said that as an actress, she should be able to play any person or any tree or any animal. And Madeline Kearns has some fun with that. But nevertheless, she goes on to say, this is not the first time the world's highest paid actress, a person who pretends to be others for a living, has had a run-in with the woke culture. Earlier this year, Johansson reluctantly withdrew from a film in which she was slated to play a transgender man. She has stood by her decision at first following an outcry from LGBTQ activists, but then bowed to the pressure. She says, I'm grateful that the conversation regarding inclusivity in Hollywood continues. I am thankful that this casting debate, albeit controversial, has sparked a larger controversy and conversation about diversity and representation in film. After a furious backlash from her recent comment, she has capitulated again, Madeline Kern says, explaining that her remarks have been edited for clickbait and widely taken out of context. She reiterated that she, of course, understands the needs and demands of the LGBTQ community. And as Rich Lowry oftentimes likes to say, the mob always, or at least usually, wins. And that's the case. Once you have this so-called woke culture, it's no longer possible for you to be a woman and play a transgender man. Get the point? I mean, she played a horrible murderer and transformed herself tremendously. But again, Madeline Kearns raises a good question. As for appropriation, where does it end? Must all Jewish characters be played by Jews? Must one-legged Spanish kings, she's being fun at this point, be played by one-legged Spanish kings? And in the context of the trans debate, are trans people to be excluded from playing cis people? She gets into it pretty good. And it's a debate that I suspect may now surface in the acting community. If you are straight, can you be allowed to play somebody who is gay? If you're gay, can you be allowed to play somebody who is straight? You know, going back to the Big Bang Theory and all sorts of things like that. And it's just again, part of the silliness that surfaces in a woke culture. And that's one of the reasons I wrote about that just about a week ago, because this is what it's like to live in a culture that no longer has freedom. As it says in 1984, George Orwell says, freedom is the ability to say 2 + 2 = 4. And more we're finding that even saying a true statement is enough to have the woke culture come down upon you. Well, we got a lot more to cover, and we'll have to postpone that for another day. Tomorrow's our Millennial Roundtable, and then, of course, Penna Dexter will be here. We'll have a Friday weekend edition, and if you find yourself saying, I'd like to read some of the articles you've posted, they are available on our website, pointofview.net. If you'd like to know more about Pat Williams' book, Character Carved in Stone, it's on Point of View's website as well. And I might, as we close today, just encourage you to click on that button that says Donate. During the summer months, it's a difficult time financially, sometimes because people are traveling. We did not make our budget for our fiscal year 2018-2019. So if you can help us out, we would really greatly appreciate that. Just go to the website, pointofview.net. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. Have a great day. We will see you back here tomorrow, right here on Point of View.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.